Albert Lee Seed is proud to support the Back to the Roots podcast. Like you, they value the one-on-one conversations with farmers and other agricultural professionals that you hear on this show. Albert Lee Seed helps organic and transitional farms with a full line of organic and non-GMO farm seed for corn, soybeans, forage and pasture, cover crops, and cereal grains. Check them out at alseed.com. That's alseed.com.
You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood, today we are in Greenfield, Ohio, on a dairy and grain farm. With Charlie Eselgroth, we are sitting on his porch on a beautiful morning. So, Charlie, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad I could help, and glad to have you guys here.
So it's my first time down on your farm, and can you just give us a little bit of background, what you have here, and background on the farm?
Sure. This year we're farming approximately 600 acres of land. That's a mixture of pasture and crop land. Probably, I didn't figure up exactly, but probably half of that acreage is in pasture and hay production. And then the other half approximately is in crop production, mainly corn. Our normal rotations are corn, small grains, and hay. But due to the wet weather the last couple of years, our rotations are really out of whack. And so we've got quite a few acres of soybeans this year. We normally don't raise soybeans, but as I say, since our production was out of whack and our rotations were out of whack, and we were playing catch up because we had another wet spring this year, that we planted some soybeans in late June and early July, which is not a normal practice, but we know how to do it from years ago.
Mm-hmm. And how many cows do you milk?
We're currently milking 97 cows. We are a seasonal operation, so we milk from March 1st till the first week, maybe the middle of December, something like that. That's when we dry off. And then we all take a big long rest through the holidays in January and February. Mm-hmm. So we really like that.
And do you have a purebred Jersey herd?
No. When we started in, we've only milked since 2007 was our first year in dairying. And any of you that can remember that, when we were buying heifers to start up, that was the gold rush, the old 80-20 times. And it was hard to find bred heifers. And so we basically bought anything we could find. We had purebred Holsteins, we had purebred Jerseys, and we had crossbreds. So that's what our foundation herd was. And since then, we've been breeding exclusively to Jersey bulls. And so we're getting pretty close to a Jersey herd. We've got one or two big Holsteins still in the herd. And even they have a little bit of Jersey blood in them. But yeah, they kind of stick out from the rest of our cows now. We've got big and little and long and short and all kinds of stuff. But we're getting them more uniform. So yeah, we're going towards Jersey.
Mm-hmm. What made you decide to get into dairy?
Well, it was kind of a long, convoluted path to get there. Of course, I'd grown up. We were crop farmers, and we always had a beef herd, a small beef herd. Actually, when I was a kid, we raised hogs. When I was in high school in FFA, that was my projects in FFA. We raised hogs. Well, of course, that enterprise kind of went to the wayside with all the other hog industry here in southern Ohio. I think pretty much across the Midwest. But we always had beef cattle. And along about probably the mid-'80s, probably during the the 1980s farm crisis hit us real hard. We just about went under. There's no doubt about that. But I hung on with the help of my dad and my brother, who we were all farming together. And when Dad got ready to retire, I took over his beef herd. And long about that time, I heard about managed grazing. So I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. So I started learning how to manage grass with the beef herd, which is a lot more forgiving than a dairy herd, let me tell you. We had mama cows, so you couldn't hardly mess up with them. But we learned how grass grew and how to move them around and things like that. So as time went on, we were raising commodity crops and sticking our toe in organic, which was, I think we made our conversion to organic in the late 90s when we had our first land. And it was a slow process. So I think I certified my first land in 99. And we probably certified the last of my land probably about 3 or 4 years ago. So it was that long a process. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm overly cautious. But anyway, back to how we came to get into dairy. Times were tough, and we were to the place that we were kind of in that in-between spot with, they talk about with the crops, you've either got to be big and run a lot of acres, or, as my banker once told me when we were in a particularly tough spot, he says, you need to just downsize to your own place and then go get a job in town and farm on the weekends like the rest of us. Well, I didn't want to do that. So we started looking for something else to do. And we knew that to crop all of the acres we had organically, we were going to have to invest in a lot of horsepower. Our tractors, most of my tractors are 1970s, early 80s vintage, and we're still running them. But so we thought about it and said, we know how to manage this grass with the beef herd. Maybe we better take that, because that way we could put a lot of ground in grass, wouldn't have to invest a lot in equipment. And so we started looking at that. We came within an inch of starting a large sheep operation, because we were raising some sheep at the time, a few, not a lot. But we looked at that, and my wife was working off the farm at the time. And in fact, at that time, she was commuting to a pretty good job in Columbus, a lot of hours on the road. And she says, well, is there something that we could do that I could help with so I don't have to drive to Columbus? And we'd been looking at dairy because, dairy is the most income to come in per acre. And sheep was right below that. But she said, if we go with sheep, says there won't be anything that I can do. Sheep don't take near as much work. And so we started looking at the dairy real strong and decided to go that direction. And after we got the facilities up there it was about 2005, I think we made the decision that we were going to convert over to a grass-based dairy. And by 2007, we had the facilities built. And after she continued to work in Columbus for a year or so, help out when she could, and then after that she quit that commute, and the two of us milked the cows down here, and so that allowed her to do that, and it worked pretty well. Now that at that time, when we started out, there was no organic milk in this area. That was not an option. But the land we were putting it on was already certified organic. Our crop acreage was probably half organic at that time. Our home place here where the dairy is, it was organic. But we were just going to put it all in grass and graze it. And as you'll see, this land is kind of rolling. It's more suited to grazing than it is intensive cropping anyway. So that was a good fit. But lo and behold, we were just about ready to start buying bred heifers to populate this facility that we built. And out of the blue one day, Lowell Reinheimer come rolling in. You guys remember Lowell?
Mm-hmm.
He was our first RPM, I guess that was his title, down in this area, but he was recruiting. And he said, hey, if you guys want to get some organic cows and put in here, we'll send a truck down. So we started beating the bushes to find organic heifers. And we bought the first ones in 2006 and started milking March 1st, 2007. And so that was one of the main things, that the dairy offered us a chance to generate more income on the farm so that my wife did not have to leave the farm to work.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot of the driving force there.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when they were building the facilities that the fellows we had coming in that was installing the milking units and things like that. And, of course, in our parlor we had the units for storage hanging up above us here. And I remember they asked, says, how high do you want these up here? Of course, we've got a pit. And how high do you want to put those up there? And I said, I can't answer that question. You got to wait for my wife to come home from work this evening. And they said, why is that? They said, because we've got to make them so she can reach them. She's a little bit shorter than I am. And I remember those guys just laughed. They said, you think you're going to get her to milk these cows? I said, well, I know if I make them so she can't reach them, I know she won't. So let's wait for her to get here, and we'll tell you tomorrow. So yeah, that was some of the driving force to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So what was some of the learning curve that you went through
Oh, my stars.
in those first couple of years?
How much time do you have?
A lot.
I'm still learning. I'm still on that learning curve. It's probably not, I'm not on the steep upgrade now, and I think I'm over the hump, but I've still got a lot to learn. When I get around and talk to the fellas that have been dairy their whole life, and, I'm amazed at how much I still don't know. I know the basics. I remember my good friend and neighbor, Gene DeBruin, held my hand an awful lot. I think he got pretty exasperated with me in the first couple of years. Some of the things I'd call up and ask, but I've got a lot of good advice from a lot of people, and that's one thing I discovered when we went organic. And that was before even the dairy, that in the organic community, everybody's willing to share what they know. There's none of this playing the cards close to your vest, and that's benefited us a tremendous amount.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as far as the learning curve, one thing, probably the biggest thing, was going into this, we thought we knew what we were getting into, and then when you get in and it's calving time in March and it's raining and it's mud and your cows are outside, and I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. It's kind of like you think you know what you're getting into, but when you're in the middle of it, it's like, my Lord, what have I done here? Mm-hmm. And there's no backing out then. Mm-hmm. But it is a complete change of mindset and lifestyle from when we were pretty much just grain farmers. I mean, your life revolves around what these cows need, and that has to come first on everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably been the biggest learning curve. The feed rations and stuff like that. I got to tell you, I lean a lot on Gene on that. I said, what should I do here? And he says, well, this would probably work well. So I probably haven't learned the basics of nutrition as much as I need to, because I have a good resource at arm's length here that I just go to. And so a lot of the health aspects. I remember our first crop of heifers or calves that we had. I didn't realize that you had to dehorn every dairy cow when they were young. And all of a sudden, they were a year old, and they've all got these horns. Oh, my stars, I didn't think about this. We always had polled cattle in the beef. And so it never entered my mind. And then we had a job ahead of us. And I learned pretty quick on that. It says, okay, we got to get these.
Let's not ever do that
That's
again.
right. That's right. So we get on them when they're when they're young.
Mm-hmm.
And
now, you were grazing a beef herd.
yes.
Was there a bigger difference in grazing dairy cows and versus beef cows than you expected, or was it a lot more the same?
I think it was a lot more intense because with the beef herd, I was basically running a cow-calf operation.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to have near the quality for that mama cow. Now, when you take your calves away and you're wanting to grow those, we weren't doing a whole lot we weren't trying to finish them necessarily on grass. So I wasn't having to worry about the quality that we have to worry about with the dairy cows. If I was trying to grass finish steers, that would be a lot more comparable to what we have to do with the dairy cows. But yeah, putting them out there and, wanting that fresh, young 8 to 10 inch growth on the dairy cows, learning how to do that consistently. And of course you get immediate feedback on that, because if you screw up in 2 days, when the trucker comes, you're going to know it. And I was surprised also how quickly lactating dairy cow can go out of condition. That was one of the big eye openers for me, that 3 days ago she was in lush grass and she looked really good, and 2 days later that maybe I didn't give her quite enough, and all of a sudden you can count ribs. And they respond really fast to the management, which beef cow, shoot, it would take a month for you to see that. Or maybe I just wasn't paying attention. Maybe that was it. So I didn't see them twice a day and up close and personal. So that was a learning curve that I had to go through there, that you got to pay attention every day.
And raising forage for beef cows versus dairy cows, I assume, was a similar learning curve as well.
Well, yes, but maybe not so much as on some dairies, given the fact that we're seasonal. Most of what we feed can be just, dry cow hay. We don't need a large quantity of milking quality hay. So that gave us a little bit of reprieve there. I've learned now that I need more of that than I thought I did 10 years ago, because for the front end of the season and the back end of the season. And we went through a fiasco about 3 years ago. It was after the first wet summer that we had down here, and we put up a lot of really poor quality forage for the winter. And my dairy cows did not winter well, and we paid for it at freshening time and throughout the summer. They just never produced. We lost more than I'd like to say. We lost more stock that year. And it was because they came out of the dry period in January and February, not where they needed to be. So that kind of pounded into my head a little bit. We need to be paying a little more attention to, sure, it can be dry cow hay, but it's got to be decent dry cow hay.
Do you outwinter?
Yes, we do. Well, we have a barn. In this area, there's depending on the winter, we can't spend a lot of time outside because it's mud. We have to have a place where we can get them in. And the first few years, we did not have that. We suffered from that too. But then probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we put up a winter barn. We just use a bedded pack, bed it with straw, that they can go in. We've got concrete pad for them to feed on. But we do try, whenever the ground is fit, when it's frozen hard, we feed out on the paddocks. And we've got a bale unroller that we go out and unroll. Typically our cow herd, they'll eat 4 round bales a day. We primarily feed round bales. Well, round bales is what we feed. And so if it's a nice winter day, then we'll unroll maybe 3 out on the pasture and then let them balance it in at the hay rack in the barn.
Last winter, were they out at all? Because
actually, we were out a lot more last year. We had some good frozen days, and of course, I have a young fellow that's managing the herd now, Brendan Prendergast, and his job is to manage those cows. And when I was doing all of it, there was a lot of times where I'd say, well, they really need to be out there, but it'd be just easier to throw feed in here because I've got something else I want to go do. Where now that he's here to help, that he's much more in tune about going and getting them out there when they need to be out there. So we were out a lot more last year. He also experimented this past year with some bale grazing, where he placed the bales in the fall of the year and then just moved the wire and grazed the bales. And basically in the summer, he'd allocate 3 or 4 bales a day to them. So they could go out, and they spent a lot of time out that way. And I'd never done that before. So, and it seemed like it worked very well. The cows did very well. Cut down on a lot of the bedding and the manure hauling that we had. I'm not too sure how I like where we put these bales. You know, we've got spots out in the pasture, and he reseeded some stuff over it, but we still got some spots in the pasture that you can see. So I'm going to withhold complete judgment on that until we see how those heal up. If it's going to take 2 or 3 years for those to heal up, I don't know. We'll have to evaluate that. But yeah, we're getting them out every chance we can. Where in the past, as I say, just as much to do to work overload as anything, that I had them in the barn probably more than I should have.
So if someone, say in this area, were to come to you and say, hey, I'm looking to start a dairy, what would be the advice you'd give them?
Well, the first advice I'd get them says, are you sure you can sell the milk somewhere? You know, dairy doesn't work if the truck won't come and pick you up, or if you're going to direct market or something like that, possibly. But I would encourage it. I think it's a good lifestyle. It's a good way if you want to farm and spend most of your work time at home on the farm rather than driving. You know, most crop farmers down here, we're in a big cropping area, and it's most of the full-time crop farmers are several thousand acres. So they spend a lot of time on the road and away and one thing and another. So it's been nice that, you know, you can stay and work here on the farm. There's a lot of times where I'll, at the end of the week, I'll say, wow, you know, I never went hardly any place. You know, we've got the heifer farm is a couple miles down the road, and we've got some rented acreage about 5 miles away, but that's as far as I get. You know.
Now, one thing I want to mention is you were not in your 20s when you decided to start dairying.
Yeah, you had to bring that up, didn't you?
I had to, Charlie.
You're right. And I was 50 years old the first year we milked cows. And it's really kind of interesting to me that, you know, I'd been in the process of transitioning to organic since 99, so I'd been in it for almost 20 years at that point. And yeah, some of the people around, you know, people knew what I was doing. And some people would kind of give you a hard time about that a little bit. And but when it became known that I was starting a dairy, especially at 50 years old, I got more pushback on that from everybody around. I can't believe you're doing that. Well, I couldn't hardly believe it either, but it's, you know, what are you going to do? You can't say, well, you know, I want to start when I'm 45. You can't go back. It's all forward from there. But yeah, the number of fellas that were, it was the generation that was just ahead of me. I don't know how many times I heard the story says, my stars, I would never milk a cow. When I grew up, I had to milk those cows before I went to school, and when I came back, and I got out of there as fast as I could, and I'd never do that again. And they all had stories to tell on that, and Yeah, that was unusual.
Because usually you see at about 50 years old,
Yeah.
they're getting out of the
Right.
dairy, not brand new into
Right.
it. So it's kind of neat.
Right. Well, I guess neat's a good word for it. One of my landlords that I'd rented for like from 30 years or something, 40 years, and she had milked cows when she was on the farm. And when in fact, her place at that time, she owned the piece right next to us here. And I was wanting to incorporate it into the grass dairy. So I called her. She lived in Texas. And I called her and I said, Peg, I said, I've been farming for you for 20 years, something like that. And I really appreciate it and want to keep on. But what would you think if I would put your whole farm in grass and we're going to run dairy cows on it? And she was always very outspoken. And she says, dairy cows? Are you insane? I said, well, the jury's out on that, but I think this is what we want to do. She said, all right. But she says, I did that for, I can't recall how many years, a long time. And she was the one that did the milking. She says, I would never have anybody do that. But she treated us real well, and there were several instances after that. Something would come up about, maybe we had to readjust the rent because the taxes went up or something like that. She says, I really hate to ask you to have to pay any more. Says, anybody that's milking cows says you want to do everything you can to help them out. So it kind of worked to our advantage a little bit too. But, yeah, we definitely got a lot of pushback on that. Mm-hmm. And at the time also, when we were building, of course, that's one thing. We had no dairy facilities. We built a brand new facility. And it wasn't something that we could grow into, because I knew that my milking career was pretty limited. I didn't know how long I'd want to do it, but we built it with the intention of our land base here. We estimated we could run 100 cows. And we built it with that idea to get to that point, because we knew at that point in time we'd have enough cows and milk income to bring someone new into it. If I'd go in at 50 years old and build a 35 cow dairy, well, that's a one income operation. So how in the world do I ever get any help? Because you can't afford it. And so that would leave me in an all or nothing situation where, okay, I'm going to milk this year and I don't want to do it anymore and I'm going to get somebody else. But with 100 cows, we started out at 45 cows learning, and then we grew internally. And it took us up till, just 3 or 4 years ago before we finally got to our 100 cows. But this allows us to hire Brendan, and we also hire some others to come in. I've got some neighbors here that do the vast majority now of the milking for us. And so we knew that would, if things are going well, that would give us enough income so we could phase someone in as I get ready to phase out. Mm-hmm. That reminds me too, back when I say a lot of the neighbors and people around were giving me a hard time about starting milking, every one of them, just practically every one of them says, who in the world are you going to get to help? I said, that's going to be a lot of work. And of course I had no idea who was going to do that. At that time, our boys were still in high school and college, and I thought, well, possibly if there was an opportunity, they might be interested, but I wasn't necessarily, I didn't want to force anybody into that. But my reply was, oh, there's people out there that want to do that. And I knew that in our area here, there's a lot of people working in factory jobs that really hate it. And they tell me that they would love to be out here on the farm. Well, probably if there was 10 people tell you that, there's probably maybe 1 or 2 that really, 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 really mean it. The others, it looks nice because the grass is always greener.
It's the romance of the farm, not the actual work.
And when you get out here and find out the romance is very little out here on the farm. It's it's not sitting under the tree watching the cows graze and saying, "Ain't life grand?" But I thought that there was, there's people out here that want to do it, and now connecting, that's a hard thing to do. But as I say, we run across Brendan. He came to us through our grazing group that we have here in southern Ohio that meets during the summer. And he'd heard about that, and he's a city boy, grew up in Cincinnati, but always wanted to farm. And he'd been out on some other farms and got some grazing experience, and they moved back to Ohio and was looking around, and he and I connected. And he's got what I call the fire in the belly that you kind of got to have. That it almost has to be to farm. I think you've got to have that sense that I can't help it. I've got to do this. It's what it takes to get you through when the romance fades. So anyway, it's things seem to be going along pretty good, pretty good. And
so you never shipped conventional milk?
I did for about 6 weeks.
Okay.
We started up, and Organic Valley couldn't get the truck down here for quite when we were ready to start, so we shipped with the Ron Fenton down here, who is with the Scioto Valley milk producers, and he did us a huge favor. He knew we weren't going to ship with him very long, but at the time he said, "Yeah, I'll help you out," and he's a good guy.
Now, this isn't a very big dairy community to start with, right?
No. In fact, until probably about 15 or 20 years ago, when the Plain folks started buying farms in this area and migrating in, there was very little dairy. Probably in my county, Ross County, there was probably 5 or 6, and these were ones that had just been in the family for years and years and years. But since the Plain communities have started coming in, we're getting a lot more, which is very beneficial because we've got a lot better service and infrastructure and things like that in here now. So no, just north of here, we're sitting right here about where the glacier stopped. To the south and east, it's rough and rolling and hilly, and to the north and west, it's flat grain country. So in this area, it was big grain, and you get to the south of here, it's big beef cattle country from here to the Ohio River. So no, there wasn't very much dairy infrastructure, or not very many dairy down here at all. So yeah, that kind of played into everybody thinking you're nuts, because it's so foreign. So
now, a lot of the Plain community that's moving in here, are they from Pennsylvania?
The ones here locally, like my next door neighbors, they're coming from the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, moving over here. And now we have an Amish community about 10 miles to the west of us here, and they primarily came from northern Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or Alan
Miller.
Alan Miller.
I think he was previously in the Mansfield area when he came down, and so that's primarily where they came from. And he shared with me they came down because there wasn't any farms up there much left, and this was going to had room to expand for their families. And I got to tell you, I find that very refreshing that they think it's important enough to live on a farm to raise your family, because I think that's important. But it's, in our English community around here, you just don't have much of that anymore. And so I think that's a good thing. They value what a farm is and can be, and what it does for, a person's character.
Where I live in Holmes County, we have a lot of farmers moving to New York and other regions because there won't be any farms for their kids available.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, it will be if you want to spend $60,000 an acre.
Right.
But so they're moving to New York, a lot into upstate New York or Kentucky, simply because of farmland for the kids.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the exact reason that they moved down in this area. And I know the group here next door to us here that that's why they came from the Shenandoah Valley. There just wasn't enough room for expansion over there, and all the boys, they want to farm. They do.
That Shenandoah Valley is beautiful,
Yes,
though.
it is. It is.
I'm not saying it's not beautiful here, but it's a whole different thing.
You're right. It is. I was through there. It's been a number of years ago, but that's a beautiful area.
Now, I want to go back to, you said you started transitioning in 1999.
Yes.
And just recently, fairly recently, had all your acres transitioned. Now, why did you do it in chunks? And I guess, first of all, what led you to looking at organic in the first place?
Well, the reason I transitioned in chunks was pure fear. Basically, is this real? Can I do this? And I tend to be cautious by nature. Some people would disagree with that, but that's the way I view myself anyway.
Well, you jumped right into dairy. So.
Yeah, that kind of. Of course, the dairy, it's hard to transition into dairy, where there was not one before. But back to why I started, that's purely grew out of the 1980s farm crisis. You know, I started farming right out of high school, which would have been in the mid-'70s. We came right out into the boom, the 70s grain boom, and had a hard time finding land. Of course, my dad farmed, my older brother farmed, and they had the equipment to help me, but you still had to get some land somewhere, and it was hard because there was a lot of guys expanding big and grabbing up everything there was. But I finally got a toehold in there, and things were going pretty good in the late 70s, and then the 80s hit, and boy, we couldn't raise a crop, and because weather conditions, and then when we did raise a crop, the price was terrible. You know, I remember, I don't know if you guys remember the old payment in kind programs where the government had all the grain in storage, and rather than pay you money, they gave you a certificate that would entitle you to 500 bushel of grain, government grain that was in storage somewhere. So those kind of became a commodity, and people traded around and that kind of stuff. It was really strange. I think that was during the Reagan years. But that was a tough time for everybody. I mean, there was virtually around here, you could go to a farm sale every week and not drive over 20 miles. Wow. People it really weeded out a lot of people. And the rhetoric back then was, well, they weren't good farmers. Well, now, some of them weren't the greatest, but some of them were doing okay. Or some of them were good farmers, but they just got caught at the wrong time. You know, in the 70s, it was boom time, and if you wanted to buy a farm, the farm that, is next door to, if you wanted to buy that, if you bought that right before the bottom fell out, it didn't matter how good a farmer you were. Mm-hmm. It was just timing. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, we just about went broke, just like a lot of others. And we decided we had to find something else to do. Said, in the late 70s, I thought corn and beans forever, boys,
There's still people that think
yeah,
that.
I know that, but but they will, in fact, it's gotten worse. But, at that time, things were going great. I thought, man, this keeps up. Probably in 15 or 20 years, I'm going to be farming the whole township here because this is easy. You could raise 50 bushel beans, and at that time we were getting $7, which was tremendous money, selling $3 corn, and life was easy. But then the 80s hit, and we had to look around for something else to do. So we explored all kinds of things. I spent a lot of time looking at planting a large planting of raspberries, doing something like that. And, Christmas trees, asparagus, all kinds of stuff. Well, lo and behold, at that time, everyone acknowledged that things were going bad, and Extension was holding meetings about different enterprises and stuff like that. So I went to one of those here locally, and lo and behold, there was an organic farmer there, a fellow by the name of Rex Spray. You probably heard of Rex Spray.
I sure did.
He was the mentor to a lot of us. And it was kind of interesting because we went over there. It was at our local community college, and my wife and I went, and there was a lot of people there. And they had the classrooms on each side of the hallway. They'd have Christmas trees in this classroom, and strawberries in the next one, and raspberries, and blah, 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 and all that stuff, all up and down through there. And here was Rex Spray over here, had a sign on the door said organic farming. As we walked down the hallway, all these other rooms were jam-packed with people, standing room only. You couldn't get in there. And here was Rex. He was sitting over there at the desk by himself, nobody in there. So I remember I told my wife, I said, those are too crowded. Let's wait till they clear out, and we'll go in and talk to the guy later. In the meantime, to kill time, let's go in here and talk to this guy, see what he's got to say. Made all the difference in the world. He was talking about what he did, and a lot of it made a lot of sense. He invited us to come up to his farm. He was having a field day, a couple months later. And so I took the information how to get to his farm. That was back in the days before Google, where you could, you had to get directions and all that stuff. So that shows you we were in the dark ages there. But he invited us up, and I went up there to that field day. And I remember driving in there. I said, we're going to see a bunch of little old scrawny, weedy corn, yellow stuff. And he's going to try and convince me that this is much better way to do it. Well, we drove in there, and we pulled into his house, and of course there was a lot of people there, and he had the hay wagons that we'd ride on. He started out, he says, now our corn and beans are not as good this year as we like to see them. And I'm thinking, here we go, it's starting. But we got on that wagon and drove back into his fields. Some of the best corn and beans I'd ever seen. Nice, clean.
Wow,
clean. Had some weeds in them, but back at that time we weren't used to seeing Roundup Ready fields where you got 100 acres with not a weed in it. But so they were as clean as any of the conventional stuff around. And that's when I started digging into it. So that would have probably been in the mid-1980s. Mm-hmm. And so I started digging into all the information I could find. Of course, that was pre-internet. But I stumbled on the Rodale Institute, and, a lot of the information they were having. The old New Farm magazine was still being printed. Mm-hmm. And started going to a lot of field days and stuff like that. But this goes back to me. I think I'm cautious. It took me 10 years before I was brave enough to stick my toe in the water.
And you did it with a field way back in somewhere.
I did, way back here on the back where nobody could see it. Exactly.
When you talk about organic grain in Ohio, mm-hmm. early on, Rex Spray is,
yes.
I mean, which I find it kind of ironic that the first real organic guy's last name is Spray.
That's right.
But, he had an impact that was
yes.
unparalleled to anybody else.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. And Rex, I alluded before about how you could call any organic farmer that you may not have even ever talked to them before and say, hey, I hear that you're an organic farmer. I'm trying to do this. I've got a question. And they will tell you everything they know.
There's no trade secrets.
There is none. And that is so refreshing because it's not that way in the conventional world. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Rex had an impact on mm-hmm. everyone of my generation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's no doubt. And, of course, he helped get the certification mm-hmm. agency here, OFA, started. He was my certification number is 647. Rex's was number 1. And I guess they've got, I guess you're up in the 2000s now for certifications through OFA. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we went slow on that, and I faced a lot of skepticism in the community and in my family. My dad wasn't too sure about all this. Of course, a lot of what we were doing, he had always maintained his farm in a 4-year crop rotation and the benefits. In fact, he'd kind of been getting after me because I wasn't rotating the way he thought I should. This was before we even knew there was a thing called organic. He said, "Boy," says, "that's going to be hard on your soil." He says it won't stand it. And, I was 20 years old and knew a lot more than he did. So I just kind of went ahead with it. But being able to work, I would work on my ground and then go down on his, and it was night and day. Now, he was using fertilizers and herbicides, not a lot. But that crop rotation where every 4 years it had a year of small grain and a year of hay, it was night and day. It was night and day. And so I began to see those things. And then, so that helped when I walked into that classroom and talked to Rex, because a lot of things he was talking about, I could relate back. And, but anyway, and Dad was the kind of guy, he wouldn't address things right out in the open there. He would kind of, if he didn't like something, he didn't want to talk about it. But I knew I got over the hump when we finally raised our first year of organic corn, and luckily enough, it did pretty well. I can't recall exactly. It was probably 120 bushel or something like that. And we marketed that at about double what conventional price was. And of course, he didn't say anything. But then the next spring, when we got ready to plant, I knew I got over the hill when he said, "Now how many acres of organic corn you going to have this year?" So he was interested in that. Mm-hmm. So he could kind of see the advantages of it. Mm-hmm. So that made me feel good.
Yeah, sure. What I find so interesting is like your dad crop rotations. Mm-hmm. My grandpa, back in the 40s and 50s, after corn silage, they would drill oats in as a cover crop to graze the cows in the fall. Mm-hmm. Things that are now becoming popular,
right,
like they did because they didn't have the quick fixes.
Right.
So a lot of organic farming is just taking the information and the knowledge that they had 50, 60, 70 years ago, mm-hmm, and applying it now, but it has skipped 1 or 2 generations.
Right.
And so a lot of this stuff is new when it's not.
Yeah. And along those lines, I get frustrated too when I hear people that normally they're trying to put it down. They'll say, "Oh, you can't turn back the clock 50 years. You can't go backwards." And I tell them, I said, "We're not going backwards. We're taking the best of what was there and utilizing it with our modern methods." Mm-hmm. The basics of a biology haven't changed. So we're just rediscovering some things that people ignored for a long time. So,
well, conventional agriculture biology has changed in a certain way through chemical manipulation or scientific manipulation.
Yeah.
That's their advancement, mm-hmm, but that will come back and bite, mm-hmm, them at some point.
Well, I think we're starting to see the beginnings of that right now. A lot of the discussion with Lake Erie and things like that, I've been asked to sit on some committees to brainstorm about things to do there. And one of the things I try to point out to the conventional guys right there when they're saying, "Well, we're doing everything we can do." And I said, "Well, now think back when you were kids." Most of these guys are my age. I said, "How has the landscape changed in your farming community?" "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "What crops were grown?" "Well, we were all on that corn, soybean, small grain hay. And I said, so you're telling me 50% of the land was in grass every year? Well, yeah. I said, what's it in now? Well, it's corn and beans. Don't you think that might have a little bit of an effect there? And some of them will think about it a little bit, and others, I've had it actually said, I said, oh, that couldn't have anything to do with it. So,
well, 50% of your acreage isn't going to get triple and quadruple stack stuff put in it.
Right.
I mean, that's
right.
You don't have to be that smart. I can even see that would be tending toward a problem.
Yeah. So, and that's what's going on across all the watersheds. This creek that runs right down in front of our house here, this thing, you get a big rain and it just roars for a while. It didn't used to do that. It didn't used to do that. But now it comes up out of the bank and goes back down quite regularly.
Well, when you have no life in the soil, you have no water absorption, it's basically raining on a parking lot.
Yeah.
I think, we talked about it on the way down this morning, I think we're going to see a train wreck in ag eventually. Technology can't stay out in front because the soil is still a living, breathing thing, and you can't just keep trying to kill it.
That is true. But I'm seeing a lot of positive trends too. You can't pick up a farm publication anymore without reading about cover crops and all the benefits of that. And I'm hearing a lot of conventional guys that have been on this cover crop stuff for a couple of years. They're starting to talk a lot of basically what I call our language, soil health, microbes, and stuff like that. And some of them are very amazed. They said, I don't have to use near as much fertilizer as I needed to. And sometimes I kind of have to bite my tongue a little bit because I want to say, that's what we organic guys have been telling you for 30 years, buddy. But I don't. And I said, isn't that great? So
yeah, I think there are some really bright spots.
Yes, there is.
In ag.
There is.
Unfortunately, you see so much of the negative. You don't see the slower growing side as the positive. And I think, especially with the younger generation, grew up in the internet age, they have access to every piece of information they want. And I think that's the future of changing agriculture in a positive way.
I agree. Now, if we can just get the economics figured out, how to get all these young people in here on these farms. And that's another aspect of organic that I think a lot about. And I've got several acquaintances that work in economic development. And I tell them, I said, you're missing the boat here. He says, look, if more farms, if you had more people on the farms making their livings, look at the economic activity that there would be in a community. See, most of these big grain farming communities here, everybody's got, if you're going to be full-time, you got to have a couple thousand acres. Well, if we could get it changed over to a more regenerative type of agriculture, you get more livestock back on the land. That same 2,000 acres, instead of supporting one family, could support 4. And these little towns like Greenfield, they don't have a lot of resources. The one resource we have that no one can come in and take away from us is our land. They can recruit some factory to come in with tax incentives and everything like that, but the next community over is trying to do the same thing. And you may get somebody in here for 10 years till the tax incentives run out, and then it moves to Kentucky or Indiana or California or Mexico or wherever. You can't hold on to that. But if you can develop the land around here, and that's the thing that impresses me so much when I go up to your area, Mike, up in Holmes County, the economic activity that goes on up there. And I'm not talking about the tourist industry. Now, I know that's a big part of it. But, my wife and I have been up there a couple times, and what we really enjoy is just getting out get off the highways and drive the back roads. There's people everywhere, and they're all doing something. And all the little farms, they may have a workshop, a chair factory or whatever. And the economic vitality that brings just so many people.
I was talking to a friend of mine who's a financial advisor, and he said he thinks that Holmes County has the strongest microeconomy in the world. Because he said when you look, high percentage of that money stays in the community. Because a high percentage of them have no internet access, so they're not buying stuff from Amazon. There's a Walmart. Walmart has the siphon hose in there. They siphon it out every day. But when you look at the mom and pop hardwares, the lumber yards, all that stuff local, that money stays in the community.
Yeah.
Especially, and nobody drives a local economy, especially in the plain community, like a farmer making money. Because a farmer making money is going to be buying stuff.
That's right.
So I know in 2015 and 16, the local John Deere dealer, he sells all low-hour used machines. And he said he sold more tractors in December of 15 than any other month in his 30-year history. And he said all but 2 of them were for organic farmers.
Yeah.
So,
that's when we had $36 milk, wasn't it?
That was
the good old days.
That's when Jim Wiedeberg said, just remember that high milk prices bankrupt farmers.
Yeah.
Because you write checks that you're going to have to cash down the road.
Well, I can speak from experience in that time frame there. We were in need of upgrading some equipment. And right in there, I bought it was new to me. It was a used pickup truck, but lightly used. We upgraded some hay equipment and all that stuff. And, of course, we put down payments on it. And then we've been struggling to pay for it the last several years. So, and when that was coupled with the milk price going down, and we had a cap on how much milk we could sell because of the quota, and then we run into the poor crop years. I mean, the diversity, that's always been one of the cornerstones of what we tried to do here to keep everything diverse. But, boy, it seems like this past several years it just all hit at once where nothing was good. And I don't think I've ever seen that quite that bad. Maybe in the 80s, but we weren't near as diversified then. We were corn and beans at that point in time, so it wasn't everything. But, but yeah, I think the last couple of years has been as tough as any years we've had on the farm. So I would agree with Jim that, we get complacent because we thought that $36 was going to last forever.
Well, one last thing I want to make sure we touch on before we wrap up here is you've mentioned getting into dairy late in life and knowing you're not sure how long your milking career is going to last, and you've got somebody hired, Brendan hired to help out. Succession plans. Where are you at in that process? Have you started looking at it? And any advice to people that are considering that?
We haven't really delved into the details of what it's going to take to transfer the farm. Yeah, we're at that point that, I don't know how much longer I'll be able to work full time. I'm getting to the point where you start having health issues, and on top of the health issues, you just get to the place that you just don't want to work as hard as you used to. You guys are young. It's coming.
Oh, so I don't have it yet?
No comment on that. I don't know. I'd have to ask Brian when you're not here to see if you're slacking off any. And
okay.
But yeah, I'm in my mid-60s, and it's time it's both time for me to start backing off a little bit, and I don't do any favors to the next generation that's going to come on here if I hang on too long, making the decisions and all the decisions, things like that. At the same time, we've got to have an orderly succession and transition so that it doesn't swamp the next generation. So we're starting to look at what we need to do. Young fellow I've got that's looks like he'll be able to take over. He's not a family member, so we've got to look at, okay, what's fair to our children, and at the same time, what can we do to help him get going? Right now, I'm turning over a lot of the management decisions on a day-to-day basis to Brendan, and he's learning. He does a good job, but he's got a lot he needs to learn yet too. And of course, when the financial time comes, that'll be a big jumping off point. So I'm kind of looking at it. It's hard to do when things have been tough, when there's not nearly as many dollars as you'd like to see. It would have been a lot easier to transition when we had $36 milk. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're still trying to dig out of some holes that we've had the last couple of years. And once we get that, and we're pretty well even with that now. So at that point in time, we'll probably look at bringing him in on the shares, and that'll make it easier for him to transition over and things like that. But as far as the assets and things like that, I haven't really gone too far down that road, but I'm going to have to start looking here real quick. And my advice to people is start thinking about it and talking about it. You can't just put it off till your hand is forced, because if you wait that long, then you don't have the options and things that you would like to have. And it puts too much pressure on everyone. So I guess the biggest advice is think about it. It's easy for us to say, that's too hard, I don't want to do that today. And I'm guilty of that myself, but sometime you've got to sit down and give it some thought.
Well, Charlie, I really want to thank you. This was thoroughly enjoyable.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you for inviting us down to do this, and thanks.
Okay. Yep. I'm glad I could do it. I hope that there was something in there that somebody might want to listen to. I don't know for certain that there is, but anyway, it is what it is, I guess.
Well, we appreciate it and enjoyed the conversation.
Always good to see you fellas.
Excellent. Thanks for listening to another episode of Back to the Roots podcast, brought to you by Albert Lee Sue.